Good evening and welcome to the Master Gardener Program, A Passion for Conifers. I'm Dina Henshin, Branch Manager at Middleburg Library and your host tonight. Please feel free to use the chat feature to send me your comments and questions during the program, and I will relay them to Christie during and at the end of the program. Christie Dustman is the owner of Christie Dustman and Company Incorporated, a landscape design, build, and maintenance company in the Boston area. Christie has won design awards and teaches at multiple venues, including the MA Garden Federation, for garden clubs, and on the national stage. Her personal garden has been showcased on national tours, and in 2021, her private garden was featured in Fine Gardening magazine. She is a certified landscape designer with a passion for conifers and design that is meaningful and functional. Welcome, Christie.
Okay, are you guys ready to think about conifers? So let's go. So you already kind of talked about my background. One thing that you did not say is that I'm actually a conifer fanatic. I have been a longtime member of the American Conifer Society since 1997. So I guess that would be in a couple years going on 30 years. So at the time when I went to my first meeting of the Conifer Society, that really was a very pivotal moment in my life. I met other gardeners and plant people, and I had always kind of felt alone other than my family, and that was the spark that got me thinking about changing careers and going into landscape design, which I have done, and I've been in business now for about 26 years. So tonight we're going to talk about conifers from various perspectives, and here's a few questions that I hope that we can discuss and answer tonight. So I'm calling conifers as heroes of the landscape. So why? So who are the unsung winners in our drought susceptible landscapes? How can we adapt our plant selection to the drought-prone future? What have we or you been taught about conifers? What could be a new paradigm, a new way to think about conifers? And how can we as master gardeners inspire our friends, neighbors, etc., to consider using conifers? And then how can you learn more about conifers? Because you are going to want to. So just to kind of set the stage in terms of where I am coming from on this topic, I do regularly use non-native conifers in my designs. And really the principal adage that I really try to follow is using the right plant in the right place so that the plant is successful. And I find conifers to be quite drought tolerant, and conifers, if selected with an understanding of what their natural shape is going to be and how quickly they grow, in my experience, they require low maintenance effort. Conifers are typically non-invasive and can provide critter habitation as well as wildlife food. And I think this last one is probably true for anyone, master gardener, non-master gardener. You know, we want to create low failure, high success gardens. So how might conifers figure into that? So you'll see that I do have some landscape and garden humor in the talk, and this is an example. So post-drought survivors, what in the landscape still looks good? So this is a stone yard, and no matter how much rain they get or don't get, these stones look awesome. And I'm going to suggest too that post-drought survivors, a lot of the times, what in the landscape still looks good, meaning alive, is conifers. So I drive around and occasionally I take photos. And so I just took a random photo of this property in the midst of high drought conditions a few years ago. And, you know, you can see that the lawn is starting to burn out. but all of the conifers that are up against the foundation there are all still green and growing. And this is an example of what not to do with your conifers, but I think that this image illustrates one of the points that I'm trying to make, which is that conifers can often go through droughts fairly unscathed. I don't know what your experience is down where you guys are, but during a drought, traditional foundation plants suffer. So up in the Boston area, traditional foundation plants might be rhododendrons, azaleas, pieris or andromeda, and we'll see them actually outright dry up or become a food source for various pests and diseases like lacebug. I've seen burning bush wilt. I've seen forsythia wilt. So the things that we think can't be killed, they wilt. Even ornamental grasses suffer. And so this is obviously this idea of what can we plant if it's really going to be hot, if it's going to be drought conditions, if there's going to be water bans. This is a big topic on people's minds. And so today I just Googled drought tolerant plants, and there was just like so many lists that came up. I just happened to copy this one here. Um, so, and if you have gone to other lectures, garden lectures, this is a common list that you would be given by a speaker. Here's the awesome plants that are going to survive any situation. And I think, at least from my experience, that is not always the case. This is just a house in my neighborhood, again, during the drought. And, the yews, the dwarf white pine, the junipers here in the front, they all look fine. Oops. But it's the Japanese maple is dying, and this pieris or andromeda, you see that the leaves are kind of that orange yellow color because they've been totally devastated by lacebug. So I did look at your county, and this is a pretty nifty, I guess, government website that is still being run by the government, I guess. Drought.gov. So I was able to put in your county. And what it told me is that this is the 32nd driest April on record over the past 131 years. So you're down about 1.6 inches. And it's the first driest year to date over the past 131 years. And they will give you a map. And so I copied this here. So the yellow is saying that it is abnormally dry, and it's saying that of the percent of Loudoun County, that you're almost at a total 100% as being abnormally dry. So then you think, what's there to look forward to this summer? Basically descending down this terrible temperature gauge here on the side to actually being called drought, severe drought, extreme drought, exceptional drought. So why am I saying that? I'm sure many people have talked with you about climate, et cetera, et cetera. It's really just to set the stage that it's not, just, oh, this just happened one time and, we're going to go back to the good old days. I think that this is really the new standard. So this is a front yard garden that I planted a number of years ago. And during the drought, basically all of the conifers look good. Even the, if you guys, I don't know if you have down where you are this native cactus called Opuntia. All the little brown is all the flowers that have just finished flowering, but the peonies are suffering. These are actually ornamental grasses that are suffering, but the conifers still look good. Here's a design that I did a number of years ago, and the conifers look good. Even the grasses are starting to decline. So why am I showing this is because I just think we need to change our thinking. So can we, in good conscience, continue to plant the typical? So I just happened to Google hydrangea, and I don't really have anything against hydrangeas, but I do notice that every year there's like, 25 new hydrangeas that all have new names, and they're probably very similar to the other ones. So, and people I think have like an obsession with hydrangeas. But when I look at this and I see these pictures that may or may not be photoshopped, they may or may not be real, I think to myself, where are these plants going to do well and thrive with minimal inputs? And we do put up here, we do put hydrangeas in our planting plans, but we're aware of the fact that we are using something that's going to require more outside intervention for success. So can we in good conscience, continue to do the same thing? Can we in good conscience ignore the typical? This is just a house in my neighborhood that I feel like I should leave a pamphlet for. Please allow me to help you, and let's reveal your house again. But again, you see the evergreen material doing well. And this is another horticultural joke. Can we in good conscience plant the typical atypical? So, I just happened to be looking for photos on the web, and I came across this one, which I'm going to suggest is not real. I'm going to suggest that this is photoshopped, but this to me would be what hell is like for me. All of these garish annuals that need support. So I can't tell if you guys are smiling or not because I actually can't see you at all. So so I know that I'm speaking to gardeners who care, right? I'm going to assume that you value and embrace ecological principles to the extent that you can. I'm going to assume that you, like me, want low water and low maintenance plants. In this area, we do face water bans in different towns. I don't know if that's the case for you, but that's a pretty sad moment when the water ban gets levied. We don't want to be replacing dead plants, and we want our gardens to be successful. So how could we push ourselves, push the envelope further in our plant selection and in our plant appreciation? So we need to examine our plant choices. And so tonight we're going to be looking at conifers. So first we're going to talk about what is a conifer. So what were you taught about conifers? What's your, when you think of conifer, what comes to your mind? And how can we use them in a garden? So this is often, I think, what people think of when they hear the word conifer. So this happens to be in a traffic island near my house, and this is my partner and previous dog standing as a way of giving you some sense, literally how high this absolutely enormous taxus is. So let's assume that it's, probably 12, maybe 15 at the apex feet tall, and I don't know, maybe takes up 20 feet. So what is the point of this particular plant? And I think that informs the the feelings that a lot of us have about that word conifer. You know, they're ugly, they're big, they're blobs. They're not particularly visually appealing. And when I drive around this circle, when I see that conifer, when I see that yew, I think to myself how much money that town pays to have someone come in a bucket truck and shear the top of that, because obviously it's beyond what a person would be able to, cut back by standing on the ground. So I just think about, like, if we could take that money that is spent trying to maintain this absolutely enormous, ugly plant, what if we took that money and put it into something that is going to stay a size that is manageable, or that it's going to add to the visual impact of the traffic circle. So I almost had an accident when I drove by this house. Talk about maintenance. I mean, can you even like imagine? These are so perfectly like flat and rounded that it looks to me like as soon as like a new little shoot comes up on the top, someone comes out and gets rid of it. Um, and this is just, I mean, it's like A for effort, but wow, is that a lot of crazy looking yews. And then I do have a little thing with arborvitaes at times. These are some photos of places around where I am. So you see arborvitaes, which is another very typically used, overused conifer. And that might be what comes to your mind when you hear the word conifer. Oh my goodness, those arborvitae. And, this person up here really takes a lot of effort to prune them into, I don't know, little dowel shapes. Here's a new planting of little arborvitaes, and they still have the tags on them. So that's very helpful, in case you ever forget. And I guess when I look at this, I think to myself, I see the goal. I see that the goal was to try, most likely, to create some privacy or to create an edge in an urban situation. But I think we can all kind of predict for the future that, you know, some of these are going to die, and it's going to be, I don't know, 10 years before they actually start to perform any sort of blocking or baffling function. Just compulsive. People are compulsive with their arborvitae, and there's so many other conifers to use, and there's other conifers that can perform the same function as what this person is trying to do. My sense is that they're trying to, again, create some sort of an edge. It's a busy intersection, and it's going to take, I don't know, 15 years for those to actually grow in together. And, it's literally just around the entire property. And this, I just had to stop the car and get out and take a picture of. This is probably like the most arborvitaes I've ever seen in one location. Just like way too many. It's like a prison yard of arborvitaes. And what is the purpose? What is the purpose? A nice, huge, huge, huge dead lawn. And speaking of dead, I had to take this picture. These are a very special variety that we do have up here in the Boston area. They're called dead arborvitaes, and they're brown. They never need any uh, input at all. No water, no, any sun condition works. So what then what then is different about this arborvitae? This is a typical used arborvitae, Thuya green giant. But what I'm going to suggest is that because it's in an arboretum setting, so it is kind of on its own, allowed to be its big, beautiful self. No one's shearing it, no one's cutting the top off. It's not growing into two of its best friends on both sides of it. So there's a way in which, even though this is, an overused plant, the way that it's used in this situation, it becomes something different. And one of the ways that I think about conifers, at least some conifers, is that they become a living sculpture. There's something sculptural, three-dimensional about them that really gives pause. Conifers have a bad rap. This is a photo from my own front yard, and I have lots and lots of different kind of conifers. And, I think what I'm trying to do is show, I think we're only seeing the very smallest sliver of what is possible in the whole world and realm of conifers. And so I'm trying to introduce these amazing plants to neighbors, to folks that I'm working for, to people like you. So, can we start to think about conifers in a way that you feel like you actually might want to go out and buy one on purpose? Here's from the backyard looking. So from this set of windows here at the back of my house, I'm looking out at these sculptural shapes and colors of conifers. So again, when I say the word conifer, another thing that might come immediately to mind is that conifers are for winter. So, you know, we have to think about winter. There's going to be a time of the year where there's nothing else happening. So I guess we're going to have to plant a few conifers. And I think that's what we've been taught about them, is that, you know, they're like, a requirement, a boring requirement, and hopefully we can get that over quickly and get on to the fun plants. And so I Googled winter interest plants to see what came up. And, a lot of the time, winter interest plants, I did find here, Ask a Master Gardener, conifers for winter interest. So again, it's conifers, not just conifers, it's conifers for the purpose of winter. And yes, many conifers do look super awesome in the winter. This picture right here is a weeping Norway spruce. It's a relatively low weep, meaning that it has now created this skirt that you're seeing all around it. That is just super fabulous, interesting. And this is a Picea omerica Bruns pendula, very upright, narrow, growing, quite lovely with the snow. But if you read between the lines on these lists of winter interest plants, like I said, really the message is do a few conifers for the back, but then think about other plants for the front. So like you see in this picture here, again, we have the arborvitae, we must have them. So we have the arborvitae, and then we have yellow twig dogwood in front of it. And it's not bad to use a conifer as a backdrop, but I think what I'd like to suggest is that the background could be a conifer and the foreground could also be a conifer. So I have had the opportunity as part of the Conifer Society to travel to different countries to see conifers. And this is a conifer collector that we went to see in England. And, I'm not suggesting that this is what anyone, even myself, would want as a garden. It really looks like, every square inch has been packed with a plant. But the reason that I show this photo is to start to dispel that concept or that idea that conifers are green. So, and that they're often a blob or the backdrop. And you can see many different shapes and colors that's happening in this particular garden. And I'm guilty too. When I have taught planting design, there's times that I'll say, plan for winter first, cite your evergreens. But what I really mean is I love conifers, so figure out where they're going to go first in the design. So when have you ever heard a speaker other than myself say, plant that conifer for spring, summer, and fall? What if we changed our paradigm and considered, using conifers as 4-season garden building blocks that can cope with drought and low maintenance? Could we use conifers like this? This is a garden put together by a member of the Conifer Society. So you see it kind of has a collector's feeling to it. But you see all of the different shapes, sizes, and you really can get a lot of texture, layering, color with conifers. And there's still other plants that are in here, beech, maple, etc. But what would a garden look like if conifers were the majority of plants? And I would say that is the case for my own garden. Could a conifer be the thing that's in the foreground? Could it be in the midground? Could it be in the background? So this is a garden that same one I was showing you, that really in this particular picture we do have a beech back here, and it looks like some sort of herbaceous or deciduous planting on both sides, but most of what we're seeing in this particular vignette are conifers. Another photo. He loves them so much that it looks like they're going to come in the window. So conifers can perform the role of perennials, kind of that low front layer, could perform the role of being a shrub, could perform the role of being an anchor plant. And conifers are as varied and interesting as what we typically call the interesting plants of a garden. So in this particular vignette here, it is all conifer. We have a dwarf hinoki cypress. This is a blue spruce. This looks like, I don't know, maybe a Swiss stone pine. And this is a spreading juniper. This is a larch. So you see that using a conifer in this situation really does perform the role of what we might be thinking about using instead some sort of a perennial or some sort of a shrub. So when I think about conifers, I've mentioned that I think of them at times as a living sculpture. And the reason is because I see them as a living form, and I relate to them, and I use them, and I place them based on what their form is. When they grow and they're happy and they're doing their own thing, are they basically a living mound? Are they a living globe? Are they a living pyramid, cylinder, or something that grows on the ground? So I'm thinking about their shape as I think about how to use them in the garden. And there's plenty of different shaped conifers. And building blocks of a garden are, how do we combine all of these shapes? The shape of a shrub, the shape of different kinds of perennials, the shape of different kinds of trees and conifers. So here we have, a number of different shapes depending on what the conifer is, and also different colors. This is another horticultural joke. So conifers and people come in a variety of shapes and sizes. You get it with the spreading habit? Okay. So just to kind of look at what are the shapes that we could find among conifers. So there's a variety of conifers that are going to be low spreaders, ground huggers, kind of taking that perennial layer um, and performing that function. So we have Daub's frosted juniper. We have Juniper procumbens nana. This is multiple juniper blue star. And here we have a Pinus parviflora AOI. Pinus parviflora is Japanese white pine. Or we have spreaders that have like a few little oddities about them. They might, spread for a while and then throw up a leader and then start to spread again. So you get these very interesting moundy kinds of shapes. And this has not been pruned to be moundy like this. This is how the plant grows. So if I was to use this plant in a project, and if I was to try to make it into something that's round, I'm going to be fighting the the inherent growth habit of the plant. So I want to try to pick something that the growth habit, how it's going to be shaped, works with the spot that I've put it. Here's another kind of creepy crawly. This one's called Uncle Fogey. So perhaps this is a bit overboard with conifers as a ground cover. Does look like this person really went kind of nuts with the ground cover juniper. You see that the pachysandra here is yellow, looks pretty awful. But what if in the center of that ground cover there was like a super fabulous conifer as the focal point? Weepers. So things that weep are awesome because, first of all, they're very interesting texture. But when say I want to plant something underneath a window where I do not want to constantly be fighting to keep it below the window, or, I don't want it to get much taller. Weeping evergreens can really perform a great function there. So here we have a Colorado blue spruce called the Blues. Here we have another Norway spruce. This is just pendula. So that idea of something that might stay kind of at that mid level. Then we have roundy moundy kind of shrub form conifers. Again, with different colors, texture. Here, you're probably familiar with the threadleaf Chamaecyparis versus more of a needled kind of a pine. Here you see that the new growth, the candles at the end have that white color, which is very ornamental. So those roundy moundy guys. And here we have a big roundy moundy guy who has gotten bigger. This is Pinus strobus blue shag. And I think there's probably been some pruning to try to accentuate kind of to reveal some of the inner sculpture of the branching. But that, you know, this to me would be like, I would love looking at this year round. There's tall, skinny guys to anchor or to be an accent plant or to plant two of them as on either side of a walkway. And here's an example of my favorite arborvitae. This one's actually called De Groot's Spire, and it does stay quite tight and narrow. And this is a private garden that I went to as part of the Conifer Society. And you see they have 4 of them here as really as sculpture. And this is a garden that right now, from this perspective, has only 3 plants. It has the arborvitae, it has lavender, and it has some sort of a calamagrostis, maybe uh, Carl Forrester. It does help that it has these wicked cool little UFO looking things. That certainly adds something. But, you know, the use of a very dramatic shape of a conifer really is quite arresting. You know, pyramidal conifers. And this was a house that I drove by for a number of years until you really could not see the front door anymore. And I'm not sure that anyone could actually get in the front door. So these are Colorado blue spruce that would want to be, I don't know, 30, 40 feet tall, planted as foundation plants in front of this low ranch. So eventually they did take them out, which was sad because I really liked driving by and having a very mild sense of plant superiority. But one of the things that I want to say about conifers or plants in general is, you know, anticipating how big the plant is going to get. And I don't know if you're like me, like sometimes I'll look at the tag and I'll be like, absolutely not. No, that can't be true. And you know, it's not going to get to be 30 feet tall. You have to be kidding. This thing is only like a foot tall right now. So, oops, I guess the tag did not lie. So other pyramidal shapes. Here's 3 very different looking conifers, all in the Chamaecyparis family: Lutea piscifera and Chamaecyparis obtusa nana. So, you know, you really can get just about any impact that you want. And twisty and sculptural plants. Like this guy here, you know, you might even start to think that, you know, it might start, you know, singing or dancing or walking around. You know, there's an animistic quality to some conifers. You know, here is a shot from the New York Botanic Garden looking up at a stand of Chamaecyparis nucatensis pendula, the weeping Alaskan cedar. And, you know, just how dramatic that is, those silhouettes against the sky. and then really emphasized with this sheared hedge and really loose planting in front. Just so sculptural and amazing. Here's a conifer arbor that we saw at a private garden from a Conifer Society member. You know, two weeping blue atlas cedars planted on either side and allowed to join as an arch. And that amazing, I'm going to call it flagging, the kind of the falling branches that give it that beautiful sense of drape. And this is just a little friendly guy that greets a friend of mine when she comes home and goes into her house. You know, she sees this little guy, and this guy is also hiding a meter, a gas meter. So conifer shapes are such an important metric that they have been categorized by the American Conifer Society. And if you go to the Conifer Society website, you would be able to get a lot more information about conifers. But I think it is important to think about, you know, what is the shape that you're looking for, and then is there a conifer that, you know, can perform, you know, can meet that need. So you see all of these different shapes. And conifers and their cultivars have variable growth rates. They're categorized again uh, by how fast they grow. So miniature, dwarf, intermediate, and large. So here on the left, you see this is a very, very, very slow growing miniature Chamaecyparis. You know, let's just say that it's, I don't know, maybe almost a foot and a half wide. I would say that the trunk on that is going to be a good 3 inches, which if you would imagine a tree that had a trunk that was 3 inches, you would expect it to be much, much larger. And that's because this is a very old specimen of a miniature conifer that's really only growing probably less than an inch a year, maybe even just a half an inch a year. So if you look at that and you think about it as being maybe 18 inches wide, and you think about how many years did it take growing a third to a half an inch a year to get to be that big, versus like if you were out on a Christmas tree farm where you know, a spruce might throw, you know, 3 feet in a year. That would be considered a a large growth rate for a conifer. So that would not be appropriate to put in a spot where you want it to stay small. And the third characteristic, so we have shape, we have growth rate, and then foliage variation. So again, so many different kinds of options: soft ones, pointy ones, blue ones, yellow ones, green ones. And here's some foliage variegation. I think people don't typically think of conifers as having variegated needles, but they do. So here you see this is actually a type of arborvitae that has these yellow, you know, kind of a almost like a tie-dye looking pattern. Here, this is a very, once upon a time, very sought after conifer, Abies coreana silberlock, because the needles, the undersides of the needles have that white coloring. Oops. And here we have, this is dragon's eye, Pinus densiflora, oculus draconis. Very interesting foliage. Or foliage textures. And this is probably something that you might not have thought of before, but the idea that in spring, the new growth on conifers can really be quite lovely and can provide a contrast, that new growth contrasting with uh, the the second year growth or with interesting cones. So just this idea of color variation, and that, I think when people think of the word conifer, they don't think about color. They don't think about color variation. When I hear the word color variation, I'm going to assume that someone's most likely talking about deciduous plant material or perennials. But conifers really can carry the show. So I show this picture because this is a sign of a true collector. This is someone that literally wanted to have certain plants, almost like people that are into birding and they have like their bird book and they, check off the birds that they've seen. That's what I'm going to make that assumption based on what I'm seeing here. It could also be that this person has really thought through how big the plant wants to be and is thinking about, a 10-year horizon. It looks like that might be the case in the back. But I think, this is probably not going to make people want to run out and buy conifers. So at least for me, when I'm doing a project or, planning a garden, I try to think about what plants do I want to start out with some size rather than, as little itty bitty things. In my own garden, I created a contained bed, and that's where I put the little guys. So then the little guys look like they're friends with each other instead of, um, you know, it just kind of looks like COVID was happening in this planting bed. All the plants are social distancing. So if we plant and we end up with this kind of a very richly textured, layered use of conifers with some deciduous material, with some perennials for sure, and not like this. This just is a very interesting photo. We have the dwarf Alberta spruce, which are quite large, actually. Dwarf plants can get large over time. So here they all are. I'm not sure exactly what their purpose is. They're not really providing any privacy. And there's this really tall fence. And so, I kind of imagine that the person put up the fence so that the conifers don't run into the street. Um, and this was a house that was knocked down and a new one was built. And I just, think to myself about how much all of those windows must have cost to look out over a very busy street that usually has backed up traffic. And so what did they do? They planted two Pinus strobus, eastern white pines, which are going to want to be probably 80 feet tall. So again, probably in need of a pamphlet or rescue by a master gardener. This is a beautiful garden up here in the Boston area, and we haven't really talked about conifers that actually lose their needles. So larch is probably something you're familiar with. This is a weeping larch, and so during the year, it has this amazing shape. And then in the winter, when all the needles, all the little foliage falls off, you still have that very interesting shape of the branchlets. So we've discussed that conifers have as wide a range of shapes, sizes, colors, textures, and seasonal interest as our go-to plants. And they are lower maintenance than many landscape plants if selected for the right plant in the right place. Conifers tend to be more drought tolerant than many typically used plants, and they've been long overlooked or maligned as primarily for winter or just a big, they're only big, huge blobs that we wish weren't there. So let's consider this garden shift, kind of push yourselves. The conifers could be the majority of the garden, or at least be more of a presence in your garden, not just for winter, but because of all of their other characteristics. So if we push ourselves and our friends, take new interest in that section. Like when you go to the nursery, there's like that one section that maybe you haven't gone to, and that's where the conifers are. Like maybe go check those out. Maybe plant some interesting things in your yard that get people interested and talking, and learn more about what is really out there. So the Conifer Society, its mission is what you might expect: to promote the development, propagation, and conservation of conifers, encourage appreciation and use of conifers, and to educate the public, and to spread the joy, knowledge, and diversity of conifers. So I looked to see what was the nearest Conifer Society reference garden to you all, and it looks like it would be at the State Arboretum of Virginia here. What is a ACS reference garden? Basically, it is a garden that is primarily conifers, and it's planted such that it becomes an education tool for different gardening groups, for the public. It allows gardeners to be able to see what are different conifers, and to actually see them growing, and to demonstrate conifer uses in the home landscape, and to inspire the use of conifers. So if you do go to the Conifer Society website, you can look up ACS reference gardens. There's a map. So it looks like the closest would be this one. Then there's a few down Richmond, Norfolk, Raleigh. But that could be a great field trip to go and see a whole array of conifers, and really get inculcated. And conifers, I think, can do something that a lot of other plants can't. And what I'm going to say is that they can bring that elusive quality of dignity and gravitas to a garden in a way that more fleeting, grasses or deciduous plants, perennials, there's a way in which there's such a seasonality to them. They don't have the same kind of staying power as a conifer. And like when I look at this one, to me, it just does feel like it brings kind of that sense of gravitas to a garden. And that is it for my presentation. I do want to say, if you ever make it up to the Hudson Valley in New York, this was a private garden, now is a public garden. And I just want to point out that primarily it is conifers, and primarily it is weeping Norway spruce, with a few very upright arborvitae, and yes, some other deciduous plant material. But such an interesting use of multiple of a weeping conifer really creates an otherworldly feeling when you're walking through it that wouldn't happen with other kinds of plants. So that is it. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. You're welcome to email me, check out the website, and I think that's it.